What's your view on the recent Ukrainian firings and resignations connected to CIA Burns' visit? Does it give a better chance of negotiations?
Well, my understanding is that the Ukrainian firings and resignations are all related to massive corruption. We've always known that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt nations on the planet. But it turns out that even during wartime, these so-called patriots are supposed to be, positioning Ukraine to defend itself militarily, have been using this war as a means of enriching themselves. And some of these have done through military contracts. I think one of the big ones right now deals with food, where the deputy minister of defense was basically charging 3 times as much as the food cost and was pocketing the difference. And he was doing this in collusion with the heads of different frontline districts in Sumy and Kharkov and elsewhere, Zaporizhia. So the administrators of these districts were in cahoots with the deputy minister of defense to contract out for food, but basically charging 3 times as much as the price was, and then they'd split the excess money amongst themselves and then feed the troops. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that should get you shot, to be honest. And in some countries it would get you shot, but not in Ukraine. Because everybody's corrupt. And I think the United States is concerned that they can't have. Right now, there's a huge political infighting in Ukraine. The struggle between Zelensky and Zaluzhny, the general, is real. There's some talk that Zelensky's going to try and have him fired or have the minister of defense fired. You and I have talked in the past about a New Yorker article that was written in the fall and how I felt that was a signal that the United States was shifting away from Zelensky to the military, and we've seen further evidence of this. And so I think the United States right now is, we're going to provide this equipment on a timeline of our choosing, and we want to make sure that when that happens, the right people are in charge in Ukraine. And if it's going to be Zelensky, then he has to purge himself of the totality of this corruption that surrounds him. And if it's not going to be Zelensky, then pressure has to be put on Zelensky to exit stage right and get the right people in that the United States believes could responsibly carry out the policies that we want. The American people now, with a Republican-controlled Congress, are going to have limited tolerance for continued corruption. We're providing Ukraine with tens of billions of dollars worth of assistance. Much of that is direct financial assistance. And when it becomes clear that a significant portion of that is being used in a manner that wasn't approved by the American taxpayer or Congress, instead to enrich already corrupt individuals, that could break the back of America's ability to continue to support Ukraine.
How long will it take to replenish NATO arsenals after foolishly giving everything to Ukraine? And do you think this will weaken NATO's ability for out-of-area attacks? Also, could this strengthen potential NATO opponents more on the world stage? Will it embolden multipolarity more?
Good question. Look, the Germans have already answered this. The head of the German military establishment has said, if you give away Leopards, understand this: we aren't able to build new Leopards. Steel is expensive. Our economy is in the dumps. Energy is high. We may not be able to build the replacement. So we're already, he said, we're already naked. We've already given away everything. We don't have a defense worthy of the name. Now you want to take what little we have and give it to the Ukrainians, assuming that somehow we can rebuild this and rearm, and we can't. We don't have the ability to build these tanks in the numbers necessary to build a viable military force. And I would imagine that that situation is replicated in England and in France and all the other nations that are stripping away their equipment and giving it to the Ukrainians. I think there's a hope that the arsenal of democracy in the United States will step in and replenish them. But the United States is already, I think they've committed, or at least are on the verge of committing to providing M1 battle tanks to Ukraine. But they're not going to take these from the American stocks. The Americans are going to do this by building new tanks. Because we've already depleted the money. When Congress allocates money, that money comes from either drawdown funds, which means that the president can go to the military and draw down from existing stocks and give it to the Ukrainians, or there's funds earmarked for new construction. We've pretty much drawn down everything we can. So now to get these tanks in, we can't just give them tanks that we have. We have to build new tanks. And so we've got to take this and we got to put that order in, and then those tanks have to be built. So the tanks won't be built until, sometime end of this year, early next year. Ukraine's not going to be around by then. But point I'm trying to make is, while the United States is building tanks for Ukraine, we can't build tanks for anybody else. So if Europe is depleting its arsenal in hopes that the Americans will backfill it with new modern equipment, where's that going to come from?
How much do you know about the United States ballistic missile defense program? How effective would it be against a full nuclear exchange from countries like Russia or China?
I know a lot about it, and it would be totally ineffective. Virtually 100% of the missiles launched by Russia and most probably China would impact their desired targets here in the United States. There's nothing we can do to stop it, and it would be the end of the United States. Any notion that the United States can somehow use ballistic missile defense as a shield to mitigate against the harm that could be brought by nuclear weapons is just a fantasy. And this applied both with Russia's older arsenal and it's on the phone with Wagner Group, how much they charge. Okay. I'm sorry. I read those comments every now and then, but Russia is in the process of fielding a new generation of missiles. For instance, the Sarmat, which, and I'm going to trigger interesting debate on my Telegram channel. If somebody said the South Pole doesn't exist, but they can fire this instead of going over the north, like most missiles will do, unless they're submarine launch missiles from the coast. The Sarmat can go the south, and what that is it evades any missile detection, early warning detection system, because the United States doesn't have one oriented south, and will come in and hit targets, and we won't even know it's happening. And then there's the Avant-Garde, which is a hypersonic warhead reentry vehicle that is loaded not only on the Sarmat, but on the Yars and on other road mobile missiles and silo-based missiles. All of these are going to hit their target. So missile defense is just a total waste of money, a waste of time, a waste of effort, and it's horribly destabilizing. You see, back when we had the ABM Treaty, which prohibited this kind of activity, there was a recognition that if you went to nuclear war, everybody would die, mutually assured destruction, which turned out to be one of the best things we had to prevent nuclear war, because we knew that if we went to nuclear war, we would lose it. Everybody would lose. Now with missile defense, there's this crazy idea in some people's head that we can win a nuclear war because if we can launch a preemptive strike, destroy enough of Russia's arsenal so that what they have left is fired, but then we can shoot that down with ballistic missile defense. Hey, we win. Insanity, total insanity.
There are a lot of journalists from mainstream Western media traveling to Ukraine right now. They all seem to want to be there before the start of February. Do you think they expect Russia to begin their offensive in early February, and are they preparing for a propaganda campaign?
I do know that back in 2002, CNN was in September and October already preparing for the war. They had a war room, and they were working on the graphics, and they had their reporters already identified who were going to be embedded and everything. So it's clear that they got a tip off from the government. In fact, I know they got a tip off from the government. They were working in cahoots with the Pentagon. And I would imagine that the mainstream media companies have similar connectivity today, and that there might be a feeling within the defense establishment of the United States that something's brewing up for February. I think anybody who follows military affairs would say that the preparatory stage of Russia's offensive has already begun. I mean, Russia's already carrying out extensive offensive operations, not just in the Soledar Bakhmut area, where they're grinding the hell out of the Ukrainian forces, but down in Zaporizhia, down south, they've made impressive advances, so impressive that the Ukrainians have been compelled to divert reserves that were heading towards Bakhmut to Zaporizhia, which sort of was the intent, because now that those reserves got committed, then the Russians open up another front at Ulyder, a town north of Bakhmut, and now the Ukrainians have to divert resources there, and they're opening up another front there. These aren't major offenses. These aren't they'll thrust to capture Kiev, but these are offenses that are taking 5-7 kilometers a day, and it's putting pressure on a wide frontage on the Ukrainians, compelling them to commit resources. I think we've talked in the past about the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, and you want to get inside your opponent's decision-making cycle. And that pretty much guarantees a positive outcome on your half. The Russians right now are inside the Ukrainian decision-making cycle. The Ukrainians are reacting everywhere to what Russia's doing. And as a result, Russia's in control of the battlefield. And I think they want to, it's like a conductor, preparing the orchestra for the grand finale. And pretty soon the conductor is going to do that little thing that conductors do with the baton, and the rest of the force is going to come in, and it's going to be over. I think we're looking at, the beginning of the end for Ukraine.
If we put aside issues with training and logistics, what kind of impact would those tanks make if maintained and operated by professionals? How do these numbers compare to what Russia has on the battlefield?
Well, let's just look at it. 300 tanks would be about what you'd expect to see in a I'm trying to in an American.
Well, Scott's computing. I'll tell folks that he has one of his 2-minute videos is about the tanks but no tanks, and you can see that on our YouTube channel and also on the Substack.
But my point is, we're talking about a reinforced brigade's worth of armor there, 300 tanks. Russia is in the process of mobilizing 10 to 15 divisions worth of troops. Russia is fielding thousands of tanks, has fielded thousands of tanks, and is producing, scores more every month. So these numbers don't even begin to compute. It's not going to change the outcome. What they could do when you bring all these forces together, you could create an armored fist that theoretically could punch 84 kilometers to the city of Melitopol from the Zaporizhia area, which is what General Zaluzhny said that's his plan of action. Now, Russia, knowing that's his plan of action, has constructed 3 layers of defense with reserves and artillery, and it'll never work. But we're talking 1,000-kilometer frontage, and this equipment it's not enough. Even if it was the hands of Americans, it's not enough. If it was well maintained, it's not enough. I keep reminding people that we're all of us armchair generals are like, ooh, the M1 Abrams tank, ooh, the Challenger 2 tank, ooh, the Leopard 2 tank, because we haven't seen those on the Ukrainian battlefield yet. But the Russians have been preparing for a large-scale ground combat with a NATO-style army since 2008, when NATO made the decision to invite Ukraine in. William Burns, the ambassador, said straight up, if you do that, you're provoking Russia for the eventual military intervention in Ukraine. So he was right. So Russia has been preparing for this. And what does that mean, preparing for it? It means that, for instance, Russia's main battle tanks are being adapted with armor to protect themselves from the anti-tank rounds fired by these American, British, German main battle tanks. And they are developing their own shells capable of penetrating this armor. Let's talk about the hubris of the West a little bit. When the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall came down, there was a period of time where the CIA was taking these teams into East Germany, trying to exploit the chaos and gain access to Soviet technology. And the assumption was at that time that the Americans and NATO had a qualitative edge over the Soviets, that our tanks were better, our ammunition was better, and that the only thing the Soviets had was numbers, a lot of these things. But, if we fought the war right and used maneuver and such, we could grind them down and win the battle. But then we got this stuff, we started evaluating it, and a couple things stood out. One, the frontline Soviet tanks were better than our tanks. Their armor would stop our best shell. Their best shell would cut through the M1 Abrams armor like a hot knife through butter. And we're like, holy cow, we're trying to play catch up. But in playing catch up, understand that even though the Soviet Union went away, Russian defense industry inherited the research and development, the scientists, and have maintained the same level of research, meaning that they had superiority. And as the Americans tried to catch up with the next evolution, the Russians then matched it and went above. Boom, up, boom, up, boom, up. Today, the Russians have some very advanced armor. And our shells have never been tested against this armor. So we don't know, but they've been thinking about us. You know, the Leopard A2 that is going to be sent to Ukraine has been around since 2007. So that means that Russian defense industry has been on the job since that time, trying to develop the way to defeat that. And they do that not only with their main tank rounds, but they do that with the guided anti-tank missiles, which they have plenty of. And the point I'm trying to make is that none of this is going to take the Russians by surprise. When all these tanks show up on the battlefield, Russia has prepared for them. They have the weaponry. Their troops are confident in their weaponry. And it's not going to be, this sudden emergence of wonderful technology that's going to give the Ukrainians overwhelming support. One, the technology is not that wonderful. Two, there's not enough of it. And three, the Russians are ready for whatever they have to throw at it. So it's and I saw, there was a comment down there that, simply being trained doesn't make you a tank commander. It requires years of experience. And he's 100% correct.
Given Biden's comments about upping the weaponry to strike Crimea and the rest of Russia, do you think there's any possibility of the U.S. giving the Ukrainians depleted uranium or perhaps live uranium munitions like the U.S. used in Fallujah, which cause long-term contamination, birth deformities, and other serious medical conditions?
Well, for instance, the M2 Abrams has a 25 millimeter chain gun that for its anti-armor application uses depleted uranium rounds. So if we're going to send the M2 to Ukraine, I would imagine that we'd be giving it the capacity to engage armored targets. So those rounds would be provided. We are removing on the M1 Abrams, the tanks that we're sending in, we're removing the depleted uranium-based armor and replacing it with conventional steel armor, which should help alleviate any potential contamination that might come from an Abrams tank being struck and the depleted uranium going into the atmosphere. The Germans on the Leopard, I believe, have a round that has a depleted uranium aspect to it. I don't know if they're going to be providing that to Ukraine or not, but the fact of the matter is, modern weaponry and modern technology on the battlefield increasingly, at least from the American side, incorporates depleted uranium in both weaponry and defense. I just don't know if the United States is going to provide that aspect to it. A lot of it's highly classified, highly sensitive, and the United States is loath to transfer that level of technology over to Ukrainians, knowing full well that eventually it'll get in the hands of the Russians. But if they use it, it's not just the experience in Fallujah or Basra or southern Iraq in terms of the detrimental impact, the devastating impact of depleted uranium contamination on populations, the deformity of children, the high rates of cancer, et cetera. We know the British did a study in former Yugoslavia and Kosovo about the impact on their own soldiers of being exposed to depleted uranium, and it was a devastating report. So this isn't theory; this is reality, and we'll see what the United States does. But no, I mean it's something everybody should be concerned about.
If Russia doesn't have the manpower to take Kiev and Western Ukraine, do they have to create a DMZ between the part of Ukraine they'll take and the part they won't? Will that force many civilians out?
The Russians have made it clear that there will be no DMZ option, a demilitarized zone option, basically the Korean option, creating a buffer between a surviving, viable Ukraine that's going to continue to be armed by the United States there and Europe, therefore pose an ongoing threat to Russia and the Russians. That's the kind of cancer that Russia can't allow to happen. That's a Russian defeat. The DMZ option means Russia lost this war. I think the Russian goal is, there's a part of the campaign that we aren't focused on, but it's becoming a bigger part, and that's the air campaign. General Armageddon, General Surovikin, or Viking Surovikin. I'm butchering it, but people know what I'm talking about. General Armageddon, I can say that word. He went from being the overall SMO commander, Special Military Operation Commander, to being the air component commander. He's an Air Force officer right now. He's the guy that, while he was stabilizing the front line, began the process of destroying Ukraine's energy infrastructure, etc. He's continuing that process today to great effect. And I think his campaign is designed to destroy Ukraine as a modern nation state, basically to make Ukraine unsustainable in terms of energy, infrastructure, transportation, governance, to collapse the state and with it the government. And it's the collapse of the government that's going to bring about the end of the Zelensky regime, not the occupation of Kiev or Western Ukraine. Western Ukraine will become part of this war if Poland makes a decision to move in and try to occupy it. That's why there's a huge combined group of forces between the Soviets and the Russians and the Belarusians up in Belarus right now. But I don't think they're going to get involved on their own. I mean, of course, I say that, and next week they're going to invade and try and take Kiev. And that just everybody say, "Yeah, how stupid you are." Okay, yeah. I mean, I just don't think it's going to happen, but it could. I'm not a Russian general. But I do think, the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, has said that Belarusian soldiers aren't going to go into Ukraine unless they're attacked by Ukraine or Poland makes a move and tries to extend the Polish border, down the south. Then they're going to intervene. But other than that, I think they're just going to sit there as a force of potential, compelling the Ukrainians to do what they're doing, which is to divert reserves up. They're fortifying the line up there, and it's just a lot of wasted activity. Now, if Poland comes in, then that's a different story. But I think a big part of this campaign is going to be the strategic air campaign that is unfolding as we speak. I think we saw 55 missiles hit strategic targets in Ukraine today, including some Kinzhal missiles, some of the hypersonic missiles. And I just think we're going to see an escalation of that. And I also think that we're going to see the Russians turn part of this air campaign to the interdiction of this heavy equipment coming in. I think we're going to see, increased targeting efforts to destroy this equipment, interdict it before it gets to the front lines. I think we're going to see increased destruction of critical infrastructure nodes, railheads, rail stations, bridges, tunnels, etc., in an effort to impede traffic. This isn't a bunch of Javelin anti-tank missiles that you throw in the back of a trunk of a car and drive over unimproved roads. These are main battle tanks, and they get transported either on rail or on heavy equipment transporters, trailers, and you need improved surfaces to do this. This isn't going to be some crossroad thing. You need flat surfaces that can take the weight, and that's main highways. And so you're already starting to see well-defined lines of communication that the Russians can monitor and interdict. And I just think you're going to see an expansion of the air campaign of this nature. And one of the reasons why I feel that that's the case is a lot of the Russian air attacks lately have been designed to defeat the new air defense network that's being put in support of Ukraine. And a lot of the attacks that have taken place over the past week have been against the Ukrainian air defense network, and the Russians are starting to dismantle it piece by piece by piece. And one of the reasons why you want to do that is that when the time comes to surge air power into the depth of Ukraine, you need the air defense networks to be taken down first. So I think we're starting to see this concerted effort by Russia to shape the air defense battle so that they can project meaningful power throughout the operational depth of Ukraine.